This is the party I use for melt reactions with Diluc. I use Diluc, Chongyin, Xingqiu and Venti. I start this fight with Xingqiu, using his elemental skill to give my party some protection. This also applies to Hydro status on enemies, which allows my Chongyin to freeze them later for the elemental reaction. My Chongyin is using the 4-piece instructor set, so I want to cause elemental reactions with Chongyin to give an elemental mastery buff to my party. I use Chongyin's elemental skill before switching to Diluc. My Diluc's normal attacks now apply Cryo, which I alternate with my Diluc's elemental skill to cause melt reactions. I switch to Venti to use his elemental burst to swirl Cryo. This will pull all the enemies in and apply the Cryo status to them. If you don't have Venti, you can also use Sucrose. After all the enemies are gathered by Venti's burst and given the Cryo status, I use Xingqiu to freeze them before switching to Diluc and finishing them off. Now for an example of a Klee Melt Team, I use Klee, Kaya, Xingqiu and Venti. Note that my Klee is only level 40 and my Kaya is only level 50. I start the fight using Xingqiu to apply Hydro status on the enemies with his elemental skill. Next I switch to Kaya to freeze the enemies with Kaya's elemental skill and burst. Since my Kaya is using the instructor 4-piece set bonus, he will grant my party an elemental mastery increase when he causes elemental reactions. I now switch to Venti and use his elemental burst, which pulls all the enemies in and swirls Cryo. Now that all the enemies are pulled in by Venti's elemental burst and given the Cryo status, I switch to Klee and use Klee's elemental skill followed by a charge attack to do some very high melt damage hits, considering that my Klee's talent is level 1. To finish off the remaining enemies, I refresh Kaya's and Xingqiu's burst before switching to Venti to use his burst to pull our enemies in again. I sowed Hydro with Venti's burst this time and vaporized with Klee's charge attacks to finish the fight. So start off with shielding with Zhongli for some protection and resistance shred. Then use Kani's elemental skill followed by her elemental burst. Next you switch to Mona to use Mona's elemental skill or elemental burst to apply Hydro. Now that the enemy is frozen, finish him off with a Hu Tao charge attack or burst. Substitute Ganyu, you can use Kaya. To substitute Zhongli, you can use Diona. To substitute Mona, you can use Xingqiu. Using Mona to freeze the enemies will allow the enemies to stay in place, which means that they will be unlikely to dodge Hu Tao when she uses her charge attack or burst. An added benefit of freezing enemies is that when enemies have shields such as Shield Wall Mitachels, they will not be able to use their shields while frozen. Take note that sometimes frozen enemies will not trigger a melt reaction. This is why I like to use Ganyu's burst to apply Cryo constantly. Note that after Hu Tao attacks, it may take a while before cryo status is reapplied, so timing your attacks is important.